Isobel Waller-Bridge, The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. Abel Korzeniowski for Till, Benjamin Wallfisch for 13 Lives, Terence Blanchard for The Woman King, and Nathan Johnson for Glass Onion. I wanted to start here. You all seemingly you play instruments and stuff. When did you, I guess, when did you first realize you could write your own music? I guess, thinking way back, what was the first thing you wrote, or we were like, oh, I could actually do this on my own and come up with something? I guess, Isobel, I'll start with you and we could go around.
I started playing when I was like 4 years old, it was really, and then it was sort of amazing really, because it was just from then on, it was just music all the way. I was on a music scholarship and then went to university and did music. But when I was really small, actually, I just started just making music. I think the first kind of actual sort of piece of music that I wrote, I must have been at school, probably around about sort of 11 or 12 or something, but definitely before then, just sort of like noodling around and sort of messing around. But then I was in bands and, started writing in that way. So it just sort of all started kind of evolving quite naturally, I think. But certainly because I was playing, the piano is my instrument really, I was writing a lot I was just, writing a lot of things that I could play. And at school, I started writing for kind of other musicians. And it was just that's just sort of how it started.
Yeah, that's awesome. Al?
Well, I grew up in opera and in the orchestra pit where my mom played the cello. And this was my beginnings of with music were exactly this: very, very long Italian operas, Traviata, and then I got my cello at the age of 6, and then I started. I attempted to write music in the 4th grade, maybe, but my grandma told me, we already have all the composers, Mozart and Beethoven, and why would we need any more music? So this stopped me successfully for some time until I discovered film, and with a friend of mine, we started doing first shorts, and this was the beginning for me of film music.
Well, I'm glad you went back to it, because your stuff is great. Benjamin, how about you?
I mean, it sort of started with just both my parents are musicians, and growing up with just music being practiced all the time, and music was just kind of just part of our household. And there was a piano downstairs, and I would basically just go and make stuff up, all of which was just a kid figuring chords out. But I would just basically ignore all my piano teachers, because I hated practicing the music which I was given. And whenever there was an interesting chord, I'll never forget, it was the Moonlight Sonata. Just there's these 2 chords which just got me, which turned out to be this sort of interesting tritone modulation. But I just remember endlessly going, why does this suddenly make my body feel like aching? Like, why is this physically changing my physiology? And just being obsessed with John Williams, I think, is E.T., endlessly listening to this music. But I mean, I grew up, like I say, with parents who are both classical musicians, so I went down that path to start with as a piano player, and then conducting through my 20s. But film music just kept calling me back, and it's kind of my first love, and it's where you can be a maverick and be experimental and break all the rules and use technology, use electronics. I've always loved synthesizers, and it feels like home for me. And it's just something I've always loved since I was a kid, really.
Yeah, that's awesome. Terence?
I grew up in a household too with musicians, amateur musicians. My father loved opera and is a baritone. My mom's sister taught piano and voice. My grandfather played the guitar, and my grandmother had a piano. So, I had started taking piano lessons when I was 5, and I had 3 piano teachers, but my third one was a composer named Roger Dickerson, who's still very much a big part of my life. And I started studying with him when I was about 15 years old. And I just went to him for piano lessons, man. And then he was the one that started me thinking about composition. because being a jazz musician, we talk about improvisation, but then we kind of slid from that into composing. And I remember when I turned 16, he had me write which I kind of lost in Hurricane Katrina. I'm really bummed about that. But he had me write a piano concerto based off of a 6-note tone roll when I was about 16 years old. And I think from that point on, I've just been bitten by the bug. I think, all of us, I think, we have this thing where you start to see these things combine to create certain types of sounds, which elicit certain types of emotion. And, you start to figure out how to manipulate those things. That's the drug, you know what I mean? That's the thing that starts to attract you, to put in all these melodies and rhythms and chords and sounds and colors together, So from that point on, I was just hooked. I never thought I was going to be a film composer. I didn't even know that was a job to have. For me, I just wanted to write music for jazz ensembles and orchestras. That was it. But then when an opportunity came and presented itself, that experience that I had as a kid, was something that really helped me to slide into this world.
Yeah, that's great. And Nathan, lastly, but not least.
For me, it all started with Weird Al Yankovic. Ryan, my cousin, and I, we grew up making movies together and music together all through our childhoods. But our first thing was a band project called Weirder Than Al when we were very, very young, where we would take Weird Al songs and change those lyrics. So that was, I think, as young kids, that was the thing of like, oh, we can do this. We can take something that we love and mess around with it. And that's it. Weird Al to film composing.
That's awesome. So when they do the weird sequel to the parody movie that's out right now, you could maybe talk about that, they could tell your story in that, right? Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. I'm not saying this because you're all here. I love, like I've said, all of your scores I've listened to like a lot, like Isabel's Emma score and Abel's Nocturnal Animals, Terence, all of yours with Spike and The Woman King, and Inside Man is a personal favorite, Benjamin for Ed, and Nathan with Knives Out and Glass Onion. Having listened to it a lot this week, I'm like, I could see listening to that. I feel like I'm not alone in just listening to these scores detached from the movies. You all talked about this, I think, like you're writing the scores to make sure they're like in lockstep with the characters. But I mean, do you think about how they live on and how someone like me or whatever is going to be listening to them beyond? And does that, I don't know, does that make you think about it differently? Or how do you guys kind of like, think about the music as its own, as the music beyond the movie, I guess, or short in this case? Isabel, I'll start with you and we can go around.
I know I don't, I think that I don't think about how it's going to be, if it's going to be an enjoyable or interesting listen kind of outside of the context of the film. I think I'm so involved with how it's serving the story and what the journey of the music is doing and how it's feeding the film, that so I'm always really pleasantly surprised if anyone does actually listen to it outside of the film, because I mean, that's just a really nice thing. But for me, it's so part of the fabric of the film, and the collaboration, I'm so sort of, I feel so involved in that I don't it's afterwards suddenly when it's a standalone thing, I actually, if I'm doing another mix of it or something for the soundtrack, or if I'm making sort of little edits, then I start thinking about it as a listening experience, if I want to make a cue a bit longer or something for a soundtrack album. But no, not when I'm writing, I don't think.
Yeah. Abel, how about you?
It's very similar. I don't really think while writing the music, it's because there's so much other things that need to be addressed, and it's the least of my concerns how it's gonna sound later. Having said that, I do try to write every cue as a full musical piece with this kind of, with the same kind of attitude as I would write something detached from the picture. So in this sense, it needs to obviously appeal to me. I'm the first member of the audience as well, and if I don't have an emotional reaction, then it's wrong. That I keep looking, keep working on it. but I, as much as I can, I try to avoid writing something that would just feel like a wallpaper.
Right. Benjamin?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely agree with Isobel and Abel. I mean, it almost feels like this extra little gift you get at the end. Like you have all this music, and now we've got to make a soundtrack album out of it. But it's definitely not something I'd ever think about whilst writing the score. It almost feels like cheating. The fact that we can make an album, because doing a concept album in a way, in and of itself, you'd want to sort of start from the ground up, and it's quite interesting with soundtrack albums to have a similar approach. Sometimes it will be a chronological through the movie, sometimes it will be quite sporadic and editing cues together, but no, it's all about what the movie needs, and if you're lucky enough to have a score which works at the end and stands up on its own 2 feet in an album form, all the better. It's always interesting, when you sometimes have these incredible the fans of film music who will review soundtrack albums, and sometimes with my horror scores it will be like, this is not a pleasant listening experience, you should avoid it. I'm like, yes, did a great job. You definitely should not listen to this for pleasure. But then other scores where you want to be very emotionally engaged, and it's very moving that people will take the time to listen to this music outside of the movie. I find that as a huge it's a huge compliment, of course, but it's 100%. To be honest, I really don't enjoy putting albums together, because like by the time you finish the score, all I want to do is just move on to something complete, and the fact you got to kind of relive and hear all the mistakes and all the things you wish you'd done better. So I know if there is a release that happens a few months after we finish the score, I'm actually really grateful, because you can actually take a moment and just then return to it, and hopefully you don't hate the whole thing and make an album for it.
Yeah, Terence?
Well, man, my experiences were totally the opposite. When I first started working with Spike, I was given a directive. I want people to walk out of the theaters humming your melodies. That's what he told me. And it created a problem, you know what I mean? Because there were some scenes that would have a lot of information in them with dialogue, and he would want to hear the theme. And, and we'd go back and forth, and I'm like, bro, are you sure you want to have it here? So I had to learn how to use certain instruments. Alto flute is amazing. You could stick it up against anything, play a melody, and you still hear the dialogue. It's no problem, and I had to learn how to take those melodic ideas and move them around dialogue, which created this style that people associate me with Spike, and it was so funny, because I remember when we did Miracle at St. Anna, the war picture, and the movie opens up with a battle scene. Man, being a trumpet player, I'm like, oh my God, I get a chance to write some action music. So I wrote this big action cue with drums, brass all over the place, and Spike goes, no. No. He goes, no, I need it to be operatic, So that was the one time I had to rewrite something for him, and I had to go back and make it very melodic, very, very sweeping, and just really huge, and it's his thing. I mean, just to give you a little insight into that, when I'm working with him, man, when I first started working with him, man, I would probably give him like 20 themes, and then he would pick out these melodic things. And just to really make you laugh, when we did Inside Man, he would only want to hear him on piano, and so there was one love theme. I wanted it to be the love theme for Inside Man, so I added a flute to it, and then he picked that to be the main theme for that movie. So I had to go back and try to figure out how to make it sound menacing and make it big and everything like that. But to his credit, by him doing that, it created a style for his films that are uniquely like Spike Lee. So
yeah, I mean, that Inside Man theme, I got to tell you, I've not stopped hearing it in my head probably since I saw the movie, and I watch it all the time. It's such a great movie, and that theme rules.
Yeah, but that thing was initially written with piano and flute. That was it.
That's crazy, because it's so good. It's when you have the trumpet blaring. It's really good. And Nathan, how about you? Where do you stand on this one? Yeah.
Yeah, no, very, very similar. I'm not thinking about the only audience I'm thinking about at the beginning is the director. I often will start writing themes ahead of picture. So that at that point, it's like the director maybe is a stand-in for the eventual audience, but once we get those themes nailed down and then I'm working to picture, it's just about how do we make the scene work. And then when we get to put out the album, I feel like, oh, now I know how to do this. Now I could go back and do it correctly this time. Or I'll often stitch things together and try to make it a slightly more palatable listening experience. But yeah, that's not what I'm thinking about up front.
It's great. We do have to wrap up here, but it's been great chatting with you all. Isobel, Abel, Terence, Benjamin, and Nathan. Just great stuff. Incredible scores. Thank you so much.